Hey guys, what is up? SuperKmanrocks here, and I am here for my plans, Day 2 overview and analysis of all 8 games on the docket. We covered Day 1 yesterday. If you haven't seen that video, I highly recommend you check that one out. It's going to be up in the iCard right now. You can go ahead and see my thoughts on all of the first impressions we got on all of these teams in Day number 1, but of course, Day 2... also incredibly important. I would say days 1 and 2 are easily the most important days when it comes to this group stage because, of course, it is single round robin. And a lot of these matchups between some of the top teams in their own groups really spell who's going to be getting first, who's going to be getting second, etc., etc. So a lot of really big seeding happening yesterday and even more continuing here today. If you are excited for this video, let me know down in the comment section below, and while you're down there, let me know what your favorite game of the day was. There were a lot of really good ones today to choose from, whether you were action-oriented or whether you preferred a more complete game with more stakes on the line. I actually think there were a lot of good options to choose from here in Day number 2, but let me know what your choice would have been down in the comments section below. But with all that being said, let's go ahead and jump right into our analysis. Of course, we're going to be going over all 8 games in depth here, which means we're going to be kicking it off with the first game of the day, and it was a Group A game between the 2-0 Fnatic and the 0-1 Detonation FocusMe. Fnatic picking up a pretty big win here. Obviously, at this point, they've now beaten almost every important player in this group. They've beaten EG, they've beaten DFM, they've beaten Chiefs. It's really just Beyond at this point that has any shot of being able to contest with Fnatic, and honestly, even at that point, I'm really not all that sold that anybody is going to be on their level in play-ins, especially in Group A. They've looked dominant through the first couple games, obviously. Games 1 and 2 being played yesterday with Rux in as the support. They looked great. Upset came in and was genuinely phenomenal for this Fnatic team. Humanoid also great bounce back, but in Day 2, they finally get Hylissang back, obviously, with all the COVID protocols ideally being finished up. Everybody was on stage today, so I imagine everybody was testing negative. Hylissang is back in here to play support for Fnatic. Certainly had his Hylissang moments, and we'll get to that, but overall, Fnatic looked pretty good. Overall, the game state here, I'm not sure is quite as simple as just looking at maybe the box score, the kills, the time, all that stuff, the gold difference. Because looking at that, you would think that Fnatic really dominated this game from moment 1, and that certainly was not the case. DFM actually comes out and has a really strong early game. Yaharong actually does a lot of damage here on this Victor, and they're able to catch a couple people out. There's a really good play in the bot lane here to catch Hylissang for first blood. Really, is it even a Hylissang game if he's coming back and not dying to first blood? DFM then goes along to pick up quite a few kills just throughout the sporadic next, I'd say 10 or so minutes. They end up getting in a 6-1 gold lead with a tower advantage, but somehow the gold lead's only at like 1.5k. Like, it's really not that big, not nearly as big as you would make it seem out to be, because a lot of these kills are at the expense of waves, at the expense of objectives, and that's where Fnatic was really able to plant their flag and start moving forward. DFM starts to overforce on a lot of plays in the top lane, most notably trying to dive Wonder on this Aatrox. It very much does not work out. Fnatic gets back a little bit even in this game just through the process of time, and quite frankly, just by being the better team here. A couple plays going right in their favor. And then Humanoid comes out and has a phenomenal performance on the LeBlanc here. Really, you have to commend him. This was someone who I was, again, very critical of over the course of the regular season, as I think a lot of people were, because there were definitely moments during this regular season where he was, quite frankly, running it down, where he was dying very consistently at 3 to 4 minutes, not really respecting things. He was trying to do meta picks, things that were quote-unquote, you know, strong right now, things like the Talia, the Silas, but it's not really his playstyle. Once he went back to comfort towards the second half of that playoff run, the second half of that Excel series, really, back to the Victor, back to the LeBlanc, things like that, his entire fortune really changed around, and he's really, really back to being one of the best mid laners at the tournament, or at least especially in play-ins, because he has absolutely brutalized everybody he's gone into, including Jojo Pune, who, spoiler alert, we'll get into later, actually looks really good, not facing anyone that isn't Humanoid. But Humanoid has been genuinely phenomenal. Even in the game where Upset got the Penta game 2 from day 1, he was arguably the player of the game. He was impacting the map arguably the most. He's just been phenomenal. He is, if he can keep this up, Fnatic is, like I said yesterday, going to be a team that is significantly higher in my power rankings than I originally had them. I think I had them around 12 you know, somewhere right below a team like Rogue and Cloud9, but not really quite on that level. Fnatic very much could surpass those teams if things start going right for Humanoid, and if things really keep going well for Upset. Upset was someone who I was a little bit questionable on going into Worlds, obviously. I'm not taking into account anything that happened last year. That's not what I mean by questionable. I more so mean this is someone who's never played a single game of International League of Legends before. Coming to Worlds, he's really been relied upon as Fnatic's carry throughout the whole year to be the guy for this team. Can he do that on a major stage? And he has certainly rewarded this team with their investment. Wasn't nearly as impactful in the grand scheme of things in this game as someone like a Humanoid or even a Razork on the Lee Sin, but overall, still incredibly good towards the back half of this game. The Kai'Sa's going to be doing a ton of damage. You pair that up with the Maokai, you do have enough peel to make that work. And then, speaking of Hylissang on the Maokai, ups and downs, certainly from him. A lot of people were memeing that Rux should be back in, but Hylissang obviously offers you things that Rux is just not going to be able to offer. Rux is significantly safer and is probably going to be better against worse competition, but you're going to need a player like Hilly when you get into that main group stage, and I think let him warm up a bit. He's coming off of, you know, sickness. He's jet lagged. He hasn't scrimmed. Let him warm up a bit. I'm not going to jump on him here just because he didn't have a perfect game here in game number 1. I definitely still think Hylissang has the potential to be one of the best supports at this tournament if he can ramp up back to the form he was a year ago or so, you know? Hopefully not the summer season form, because he was not all that good in 2022, if I'm being honest. But for Wunder and Razork, the two members I haven't talked about yet, I want to talk about Razork first. Definitely some ups and downs. I don't think the early game was actually all that good from Razork. And picking Lee Sin, you really need to expedite that lead. I've talked about this a lot. Lee Sin is a pick that a lot of people were telling me wasn't going to be at Worlds, and I was insisting is going to be at Worlds. Well, lo and behold, people still want to pick Lee Sin because at the end of the day, he's Lee Sin. People are going to play this champion. He got buffed. He is significantly tankier in the late game now, which I think overall just gives people an incentive to play him when you really don't even need one for people to start picking up this champion because they love playing him so much. So you see the Lee Sin here, but of course, offensively, aggressively, he's still the thing that he was for a majority of the year, which is someone who really needs to make his impact early in the game, or else he's really not going to have that same kind of impact in the mid game. And unfortunately for Razork, he really didn't have that impact at the beginning. Like I said, Udapod and Harp do jump out to a pretty early lead in the bot lane because of the MF Kai'Sa matchup, which really isn't contestable by the Kai'Sa unless the Maokai goes completely ham, and in this case, unfortunately, he went ham in the wrong direction. And even outside of that, Steel did a really good job of being able to pressure Razork in the early game, making sure that he was there for any 3v3s that he might have wanted to take, there for objectives, things like that. Like, really just pressuring the map, trying to keep the map state okay, because they knew they scaled better. Unfortunately, DFM really did start to get antsy towards the second half of this game. Like I said, starting to dive players like Wunder, really giving a lot of gold over to Humanoid on the LeBlanc, and the gold lead kind of slipped out of their hands, and unfortunately, they just weren't able to take it back, even with the scaling comp. But you know, Razork wasn't the one that was drawing that back. While I thought he was fine in the later half of the game, he really didn't take advantage of a lot of Lee's strengths, and that makes me feel not as comfortable with them going back to that pick later in the tournament. And then you have Wunder in the top lane. Scoreline isn't perfect, but he played phenomenal in this game. He gets counterpicked by the Kennen here. And overall, like, obviously, everybody's prioritizing Aatrox ridiculously highly. I'm not particularly surprised by that. We started to see that evolution towards the back half of the Western playoffs anyways. I wasn't, you know, I talked about that in my meta report, how I thought Aatrox was still going to be a pretty highly prioritized pick. And that Kennen is a pretty good answer to that. I do understand where you're going with the Kennen in that matchup, but I don't understand this idea that if everybody agrees that Aatrox is so strong, then why are we diving him every game? Because clearly it's not going to work. Wunder is able to absorb a lot of pressure and turn that into a huge advantage for Fnatic overall. A big reason they were able to come back is because Wunder genuinely just won lane against the counterpick Kennen. As for DFM, certainly good spots here. I honestly think Yaharong and Udapon are playing really, really well at this tournament, even though DFM aren't getting results quite yet. I think the Misfortune play in the early game was certainly what you wanted to see from someone like Udapon. Unfortunately, when the rest of the team is kind of crumbling around making bad decisions, it's really hard to be able to maintain that lead, especially when you are essentially just an ultimate in the mid to late game because you don't really have a lot of frontline. You don't really have the ability to step up as Misfortune with this comp unless there's like a ridiculous Kennen ult that just gives you all of the access, but it's just unlikely to happen. So Udapon was really, really good in the early game when he could be. I thought Harp made some good plays. He also made some bad plays on the Alistar, going way too far in, getting overextended, but that's kind of just what the champion does. It's hard to blame him too much. Yaharong on this Victor was phenomenal through parts of this game, was certainly outplayed by Humanoid in the laning phase, but once you got into the back half, he was doing a ton of damage, and honestly, if he was given more time in a lot of these team fights, he may have been able to do a little bit more. Unfortunately for him, the rest of the team was not quite cooperating in that same sense. Steel, like I said, actually did a pretty good job in the early game to be able to neutralize Razork on this Lee Sin. The rest of the game just kind of fell out with some bad decision-making towards the back half. And then for Evie, he's unfortunately going to get my dud of the game here on the Kennen. You pick the counter pick here to the Aatrox. You try to punish that by creating a matchup where you can gain a lead and then potentially move it down to team fights and be a little bit positive. But unfortunately, your lane is the one that Fnatic uses to come back in. Not entirely his fault, but certainly wasn't in a good spot. He was down in CS to the Aatrox, kind of losing a matchup that he got counter pick in. And it's really not what you want to see at all. Maybe the person that was screaming his name in the crowd maybe distracted him a little bit. I don't imagine how it would, but either way, Evie really needs to start stepping up his performances. He was the carry on this team a year ago. People forget that. Obviously, Arya was really, really good for them, but Evie was kind of the one that was dragging them across the finish line, especially in play-ins to get them to that #1 seed, and he has probably been their worst player over the course of their first 2 games. He's really going to have to step it up, maybe get on something a little bit more comfortable. He didn't seem all that comfortable on the Kennen, and he's definitely going to need to feel comfortable in order for this team to start winning games. Obviously, Yaharong, Udapon, Steel, Harp, they can all be good, but Evie was the one that made them different last year, and he's really, really not been good over the course of the beginning first 2 games. So overall, not a great game for DFM. It was really good in the early game, but that's what worries me so much, is it felt like they had such a commanding early game, and even then, they were only at best able to amount like a 1.5k gold lead at any point in this game. They need it to be a lot higher, especially against teams better than them, for them to really have any chance of being able to compete with them in team fights. Overall, I just really, really want to see them be able to take their lead and expedite it even more. Obviously, they went for plays, but they were low-value plays. I need to see them go for things that are a little bit more high-value to be able to take that lead and snowball it, because right now, it just looks like they need to get very lucky with a lot of their plays for them to be able to generate leads, especially against teams they're not just directly better than. But for Fnatic, this is great. Humanoid is playing some of the best League he's played all year long, if not the best. Upset looks great. Wonder looks really good. If Hylissang can get back on track, that's phenomenal. If Razork can get his early games back on track, that's going to be phenomenal. Obviously, they're going to need those two in order to be the groups challenging team that they think they want to be, but plans at this point looks pretty trivial for this Fnatic organization, and for everything that they've gone through throughout the year, that's got to be a pretty pleasant thing to hear for this team. That's going to bring us to our second game of the day, and it's another one that I was really excited to talk about. Obviously, not the best day 1 for either of these teams, but both looking to bounce back here in day number 2. We have the 0-1 Evil Geniuses taking on the 1-1 Loud team from the CB LOL. And EG did pick up the win here, a very important win for them. Obviously, not kicking off the tournament in the way they want, getting basically obliterated by Fnatic. They had maybe the weakest showing anybody's had against Fnatic in this tournament so far, and that's a team that's played 3 games. Was a very concerning first game for them because a lot of the tools that brought them to the dance were the things that were kind of the biggest problems, I would say, in that game, but a much better game number 2 from North America's rep here in play-ins, and a lot of it, in my opinion, was due to a good draft. Now, it wasn't a bad draft from Loud. It's not like there was a big draft gap, but I do think EG put themselves in a position to be able to win at multiple points in the game. Of course, early game really does matter and does reign king here, and Loud actually has a pretty good comp to be able to try and take advantage of that early game mindset that a lot of these teams have. Most specifically, Evil Geniuses, you have Brance on the Misfortune, which is typically going to be pretty strong, but EG does a really good job grabbing the Kalista on Blue 1 because it wasn't banned, it was actually let through. This is probably still the best AD carry on the patch right now if left up, but most teams are not willing to leave Kalista up, and you actually pair it with a longtime Kalista bot lane partner here in the Taric, who's really not been all that meta throughout the year, even though Kalista has been, just because you tend to pair Kalista up with more hard forms of CC rather than the safety that Taric gives you, but the Taric was absolutely ginormous for Evil Geniuses in this game. We'll get to that later. You also draft the Maokai for a bit of scaling here. You have the Akali, which takes the damage threshold on this team up to 10. Obviously, I've talked at length on this channel about how I really like Akali right now, and I actually think she's just a little bit better of a LeBlanc. But you still need to pilot her right, and JoJo's a good player, but he still needs to get over what was a pretty bad day number 1 from him. And then you have Impact in the top lane on the Aatrox. Just a really strong pick right now. Very surprised Loud didn't pick that up on red side first phase after EG didn't pick it up with the first pick. That's been pretty consistently the first pick on blue side over the course of the entire tournament. And so really like EG's draft. Don't hate Loud's draft by any means. Like I said, MF and Mumu, always going to like that. It scales. It does well early, everything. The Wukong, I think, is being under-prioritized right now. I think teams are going to realize, oh, wait, he's actually still pretty good and pick him back up. The Victor is shown to be pretty good in playing so far. And then the Gnar is a fine matchup into Aatrox. It's just more of a team fight-oriented pick. So overall, what EG did really well this game was just kind of let their players play. They weren't always in a position to be dominating this game. Kaori and Vulcan definitely had a few hiccups in the early game, but were able to get over it and actually come out of laning phase with a pretty decent lead on the MF and Mumu lane, which is good. And then you really have to credit Inspired and JoJo for this win. These are the two that have been carrying EG for the most part over the course of the year. As much as I love how Danny and Vulcan have played, and I really do believe they were the best bot lane in North America this year, this team does generally revolve around Inspired and JoJo. A lot of attention drawn towards that mid lane typically, and then moving towards the bot lane, the two of them, so that they can enable the bot laner. But Inspired and JoJo are kind of the cog that makes the machine run, and that was very much the case here in their first game of the day, their second game of the tournament. Gotta give a ton of credit to my player of the game here, and it's gonna be Inspired on the Maokai. This Maokai pick is something that I've been talking about wanting to see a lot more. We saw it in the support position in Game 1 for Hylissang. We see it in the jungle here in Game 2. Neither of those are the lane I expected him to be seen the most in, which is top lane, but obviously Maokai just generally is such a good pick, and with a lot of the buffs, a lot of the things he does late game are just super duper valuable. Of course, he's a heavy tank that is just going to scale well pretty much no matter what. But his damage, especially with Demonic Embrace, is absolutely ludicrous, especially those E's. If you build cooldown reduction, you can basically just spray those E's everywhere, all around the entire map. And every 2 seconds, somebody's going to be walking into them. They're free vision, it's a ton of damage, and it gives you that slow, which is all important in catching people, especially if you want to use your ultimate, you know, get on them with your W, whatever you want to do. You're so tanky that it's really easy for you to be able to full engage in fights and be just fine. And so overall, really, really like Maokai as a pick, and boy did Inspire do well. It wasn't even the perfect early game for them. I would argue that Loud's jungler, Croc, actually outplayed Inspired for the first, I'd say, 5 to 6 minutes of this game. There were a lot of plays being made by Loud that were really advantageous for the team overall, but man, when Inspired gets down, sometimes he just buckles down and he can really, really start moving. The second half of the game, the second half Maokai was absolutely devastating to watch. A great game from Inspired overall, and then another phenomenal game from JoJo. I was very close to giving player of the game to JoJo. A lot of the flash plays in this game were JoJo on that Akali. Really dominated Tinones in lane. Was a little bit concerning to see him opt back into a melee versus ranged matchup after he got decimated on a similar thing in game number 1 against Fnatic, but a much different level of competition here quite clearly as JoJo is able to dominate Tinones in lane and really just take over the game in terms of damage in the late game. There was absolutely no one he couldn't assassinate. The Misfortune was really never in a position to ult in a successful manner. Obviously, she got a few really good ones off, but consistently over the course of the game, she had to be afraid of that Akali just jumping on her and blowing her up instantly. There were a lot of times where Croc felt the same on the Wukong, and there just wasn't a lot of opportunities for them to stick and stay in fights. A lot of the time, JoJo's ultimates were on point. His damage was fantastic. He was able to pick up kills in side lanes. He did get caught. I'm going to ignore that. It's fine. Overall, just a really good game, I'd say, from JoJo. And then Vulcan made a phenomenal play on the Taric towards the back half of this game. It's basically a 2v3 at Baron after pretty much everybody gets wiped. You know, kind of a trade situation. If you want to see the full details, I'd say go watch the game. It's kind of hard to explain, but you've basically got Vulcan and you've got Inspired there, and Vulcan flashes in, Taric ult, and they're able to turn that entire fight. They're able to basically ace Loud and take the game. It was an absolutely huge moment that, I don't know, if Vulcan doesn't make that play, I'm not really sure that they win that game. Obviously, wasn't the most difficult play in the world, but if he doesn't make it, there's a huge problem for them on their hands. Inspired doing a good job to let Vulcan die, ironically, in that instance, so that he can keep the Baron aggro up so that they have a better chance of taking it later. But overall, just a really, really good game from EG's main players. Impact got absolutely styled on in the early game. There's really nothing I can say outside of that. He was awful in the early game. Robo was just simply better. Big props to Robo. He was phenomenal in this game. Really styled on Impact, like I said. I believe there was a solo kill. If not, there were a couple of dives early in the game with Croc. I just remember Impact dying very, very, very clearly over the course of the first couple minutes of this game, and luckily, Impact has perfect mental, and he's able to take these losses and sit back under tower and be behind and still be relevant in the late game. I know a lot of top laners aren't in that circumstance. We've seen Impact do that a couple times. This split, it really hasn't been his best split overall for laning, but I'd much rather have a player who is willing to lose and is still going to be useful in the late game than someone who just keeps running it over and over and over again, you know, a la like Broken Blade 2020 with TSM. No flame to Broken Blade now, like I said on the channel. I think he's a lot better, but it's really good to recognize when you lose and not, you know, cost your team more advantages because of it. But overall, good game for EG. Big shout out to Inspired and JoJo. They were phenomenal, and Vulcan did play well in that same game. For Loud, they were actually in a pretty good spot for a lot of this game. Like I said, Robo won top lane pretty hard. Croc was dominating the jungle macro pressure. They were able to get a lot of the early objectives in this game, and then Branson Seos were strong. If they got that Curse of the Sad bullet time off, there was going to be a lot of damage out there. Tinones, however, did not win in the mid lane, was certainly not in a position to do a ton of damage here with that R5 Victor, which you have to be able to do in a situation like this. Lane is super important as Victor into Akali, and he wasn't able to do that. He also makes a pretty terrible play around the Baron where he teleports bot lane to try and pick up a kill and basically loses the fight for Loud. It was absolutely devastatingly awful of a macro play from him. I'm not really sure what he was thinking, but it's something that he cannot afford to do again. Really, really disastrous for Loud. It ended up losing them that game overall, and unfortunately, he's going to grab my dud of the game here. Like I said, I think everybody else on Loud was fine, but certainly not great. For their draft, I do like the idea of this. I would like a tad bit more damage than Victor in the mid lane. There were a lot of really good damage threats out there for mid lane picks, even things that you can match the Akali with, but I just don't think Victor was quite that. He can be a lot of damage, but Tinones honestly might just have to play better. You know, honestly, it's hard for me to fault the draft really at all. I kind of do like this. The more I look at it, the more I like the draft, and so it's hard for me to fault it, but Tinones simply has to play better, and this team is going to be definitely counting on that for them to be able to make some of those best of fives. Obviously, a very big win yesterday, but they're going to have to keep that ball rolling because it's only 4 spots that make it, not 5, and so you can't be even second to last in this group. But overall, decent game for Loud. They were able to at least show up against Evil Geniuses. That's something you wanted to see. Obviously, no one was expecting them to win this game, at least in terms of predictions, but it was good that they were able to maintain things in the mid game. It's just towards the late game where everything kind of fell apart when EG's draft really came online. And then for EG, you're going to be super thankful that you're walking out of this with a win. Hopefully this can inspire the confidence that you need in order to move further in the tournament with a lot of these players that I think are really momentum-based. We saw that in the playoffs. Once things started to not go well for Inspired and JoJo and Vulcan, they really started to taper off. JoJo has been very good for a while, but Kaori was good in this game. Impact was fine. I guess he came alive in the later half, but it really is, you know, at this point, as we can see, on Inspired and JoJo for a lot of what this team is going to do at Worlds. Moving on to our third game of day number 2 here, and it's another interesting matchup, one that was maybe a little bit more predictable. Not that the last one wasn't a little bit predictable, but it certainly made it spicy. This one was between the 1-0 Saigon Buffalo team and the 0-1 Isurus gaming team, and fortunately for Isurus, Saigon is still a very, very good team, and they proved that in this game. The VCS is certainly a region to not take for granted and take lightly, and they're proving that on the world stage right now. A very big win over the Istanbul Wildcats yesterday. Another big win over Isurus here today. Obviously not the 2 strongest teams in the group, but certainly a start that you need to have if you're going to be competing with those top 3 teams. And so, how did they do in this game? Well, they did phenomenally. Obviously, at points, this was a little bit crazy. I think there was like a kill a minute up to like 12, 13 minutes, maybe even longer than that. I don't remember. I know it was at least up till then, and so overall, incredibly bloody game. Super duper fun to watch. I highly recommend you go check this out if you're just a casual fan of League and you're just looking for a game that was kind of crazy. This game was insane. There were 36 kills in 29 minutes, an incredibly fun one to watch overall. Certainly not a typical pro-style game, but that favors VCS teams, and it always will. I know LLA teams are also very aggressive. I definitely picked up on that throughout the playoffs, but still, I don't think anyone's ever going to be competing with Vietnam for the most aggressive region, not even the LPL at this point. And so you got to give a lot of credit to Saigon Buffalo. Obviously, day 1, they pull out the Zac mid, try to confuse everybody. Day 2, they go for a more standard draft, but it's their opponents who pull out something insane. They pick up the Zilean, they pick up the Set, and they actually flex them top support flex, which is insane to say, but the Set goes support, and the Zilean goes top for ADD. He's been spamming Teemo in Champions Queue right now on the server. He plays the Zilean at Worlds here. I have absolutely no idea what to expect from ADD throughout the rest of the tournament. Wasn't all that good in game 1, definitely talked about that yesterday, but certainly had ups and downs in this game on the Zilean. We'll get to Isurus after, but let's talk about how Saigon Buffalo dominated this game, and there's really no other person to start with when you're talking about this game than Shogun. I've been telling y'all, Shogun's so good. He reminds me so much of what Doggo was capable of doing last year, obviously, for PCS as a region and not so much for the VCS, but very similar, kind of that, not region 1, but like not a major region, but not a minor region, just, you know, kind of better than that. AD carry who's just so dominant in his region, but doesn't quite have the team around him to be able to completely dominate higher than he may have been, you know, than his talent level may be expecting. Shogun's the type of player that I really do think you can put into a situation similar to what Doggo was put in BLG, and he might perform a little bit better. He is incredibly consistent. His laning phase is ridiculously aggressive, whether that's on aggressive picks or not. He's not afraid to try and trade, but he's very smart about it. He doesn't really cause himself that many issues in laning phase. Taki can sometimes, but for the most part, it's Shogun playing the aggressive style, and then he is just simply phenomenal in late-game teamfights. He has been the entirety of the year, and he has been in the 2 games he's played in this role so far. He plays the Aphelios here in Game 2, and he is freaking perfect on it. I talked about this in Day 1. He played the Misfortune in Day 1, and usually you're not thinking of Misfortune as this super big, consistent DPS damage threat without the ultimate, but Shogun's positioning, his aggressiveness, he did so much damage. I said he was the best Misfortune on Day 1, and that was a pretty bold take to make. He might have been the best AD carry, period, on Day 2 here. He was phenomenal in this game against Isurus. Easy choice for player of the game. But again, a lot of credit to Taki as well on the Renata. Certainly, it's not easy to play with an AD carry that is going to try and get a ton of kills and play super aggressive. The Renata was able to keep up. Taki was able to keep up here and do a really good job of setting Shogun up for multiple opportunities and really covering for what was a lot of weaknesses coming out of the jungle position, which we'll get to. But Froggy, Hazmeb, certainly different games here. Froggy was a little bit more passive and just kind of got going as the game went longer. Definitely a different role than what he had on the Zac yesterday. But overall, the Zac wasn't all that influential yesterday anyways, and he picked something a little bit more positive here in the Victor. And then Hazmeb in the top lane actually got a little bit down in the early game. He dies to the Zilean in a solo kill in the top lane, which was absolutely absurd and super duper fun to watch overall. Very difficult, of course, to die to the Zilean, but Hazmeb does a great job rebounding, gets some help from the top lane, or from BJ to be able to help his lane out. Grell comes top and tries to dive, but he does a great job outplaying that, creating a lot of opportunities for himself, and really plays the second half of this game genuinely phenomenally. He was probably the second best player on this team towards the second half, even after the weaknesses that he showed towards the early part of the game. And then there's BJ. Really have not been impressed with him. Wasn't super impressed with him in the VCS, but very much have not been impressed with him on the world stage. This was a pretty tremendously bad early game. He just got completely outplayed by Grell, and Grell is a good player, someone who obviously showed up yesterday and nearly took a game off of Mad Lions on his Graves. Came back in Game 2 here on the Hecarim, built the build that everybody hates, and was still kind of dominating this game. Definitely had significantly more pressure, was creating a lot more for Isurus than BJ was for Buffalo, and overall, I just wanted to see him get involved in more plays, and then once he was involved, not just completely run it down, like have the wherewithal to know when to go in and when not to go in. That just didn't seem like something that he actually had, and so was a little bit disappointed with him. Everybody else on the team was fine, though. Shogun, Taki, and Hazmeb, in particular, had phenomenal games here and really deserved to be shouted out. As for Isurus, not an awful game, but not a good one either. An incredibly crazy draft. Obviously, ADD on the Zilean, being able to pick up that kill early in the top lane was super duper fun to watch, but unfortunately, that pick is just not going to be able to hold up throughout the course of the game. It still did the things that Zilean wants to do. It was able to enable the Hecarim a lot more. Those speed ups are absolutely crucial. Obviously, the revive is always fantastic, but I thought Saigon Buffalo did a great job of playing around the Zilean ult to the point where it was almost a non-factor towards those back half of team fights. And then you got to talk about the bot lane, who just kind of got ran over. Obviously, Jelly made some good plays in the early game, was able to catch Shogun for one of his only deaths in the game, but outside of that, I mean, the set pick did absolutely nothing. Kind of just ran in to die. Really attempted to make a lot of plays, especially on the Aatrox towards the back half of the game, but I mean, if you just position really well against Set, there's really not a lot that he can do in the meta right now. He's not particularly fast enough, and the engage is just not reliable enough for it to be like your main source of going in, which it kind of was for Isurus this game. And then Gavoto had absolutely no chance. Absolutely no chance in this game. He was a little bit ahead in the early game, but once Shogun got rolling, it was over. Shogun had like 4 kills at like 7 minutes or something, and by that point, Gavoto was completely out of the game. There was absolutely nothing that Kalista could do. Unfortunately, he picks up my dud of the game for it. Not entirely his fault. When you're that far down on Kalista, it's really difficult to do anything, but it is a little bit of his fault that they were down so far on Kalista overall. So, gotta give him the dud of the game. But overall, it was just Isurus' bot lane that really wasn't all that good. Seiya in the mid lane on the LeBlanc, one of the few players who didn't really have any impact this game. I thought the mid lane, ironically, with all the skirmishing that was happening, was kind of the one lane that was pretty much untouched. Froggy and Seiya really weren't all that influential in the outcome of this game. Kind of makes sense for Seiya. Obviously, a more passive playstyle, someone who wants to scale into the late game. By the time they hit the mid to late game here, Saigon was so far ahead, and Shogun was so unstoppable that it was basically over. Oh, I didn't even mention second Penta of Worlds. Shogun got the Penta. The French casters went absolutely nuts. Super fun to watch. Highly recommend you find that video if you're able to. Really, really fun. The French casters absolutely love Shogun, and I, for one, am with them. I'm on the Shogun hype train, and I hope he continues to dominate Worlds play-ins like he has over the course of the first 2 days. Moving on to our fourth game of the day now. And our fourth game of the day, an interesting one between two teams looking for their first win of the tournament. And it was a matchup between the 0-2 Detonation FocusMe from the LJL and the 0-1 Chiefs Esports from the LCO. And DFM is able to pick up a very, very important win here. And it's just a little disappointing, not from DFM's side, certainly, but from Chiefs' side. We'll get to them a little bit later. I like talking about the winning teams first, and so let's go ahead and jump into what DFM did right this game. Their two carries played phenomenally. You got to give a lot of credit to Yaharong, and you got to give a lot of credit to Yutapon, because both played really, really well here. Yutapon getting a lot of damage off in the early part of the game and really making sure that DFM was set up in a really good spot to be able to get this game out of control. Obviously, the Kai'Sa-Rel combo, not something that you would typically first think of as like dominant for Kai'Sa, but it really is everything that she could want in a lane partner, and Harp did a really good job on the Rel to be able to engage without putting everybody at risk, and Kai'Sa was really able to follow up in a very efficient manner. That damage in the late game was really, really doing a lot, especially when she got online. And so overall, got to give a lot of credit to Yutapon, got to give a lot of credit to Harp. Both played this game, I think, pretty exceptionally overall for the DFM bot lane. But really, at the end of the day, this game was about Yaharong. And yes, Yutapon, like I said, was probably the most influential factor in the early game in terms of getting DFM that lead. Yaharong was the reason they had such an easy time closing it out. There was a lot of play around bot lane in the early game, a lot of moving pieces, a lot of 3v3s in the bot lane with Steel and Arthur coming down as well to be able to try and get either of those lanes ahead. Chiefs drafts a very bot lane centric comp. You draft a supportive mid. You draft a more engage-oriented jungler in the Wukong. You really need this Xayah to be able to take off, and Rakan is supposed to be able to help facilitate that. And so they also wanted to invest down there. Of course, you want to invest in Kai'Sa on DFM's side, so I don't really need to explain that all that much. But for DFM, they really were getting the upper hand in a lot of these 3v3s. And then eventually, it started becoming 4v4s. You had Tally make an early roam to try and pick up Yutapon, where he was dodging absolutely everything that Seraphine was throwing out. Yaharong would come in with one of the sickest Azir ults that I've seen in a long time, at least in terms of impact on the game. I know it wasn't like the most mechanically dominant Azir ult of all time, but I mean, the impact that ult had was absolutely devastating. Really condemned Chiefs to a lower section in this game. They had to play from behind pretty much every moment from that onwards. And he also had another fantastic ult right above the Dragon Pit towards the back half in the pivotal team fight around the last half of this game. You gotta give Yaharong a ton of credit. Somehow towards the back half of this game, even though he wasn't really involved in a lot of the trading in the early game, and this was a super fed Kai'Sa for Yutapon, he was doing by far the most damage in the game, and it really wasn't even all that close. His positioning was near perfect. His ultimates were immaculate. They really made sure the Chiefs had absolutely no shot in this game at all. And for me, he was a pretty easy choice for player of the game. But if you did want to give it to Yutapon, I totally understand. Like I said, he played that early game skirmish incredibly well on the Kai'Sa, and honestly, I think he was incredibly underrated in this game for his ability to be able to win those. Obviously, dodging everything in that one situation, but his damage in the late game still was good. The Kai'Sa ultimate was really, really useful for getting in on a lot of targets and keeping him safe in a lot of circumstances as well. And like I said, Harp did a great job on the Rel to be able to set all of this up. Anyways, Steel was great, much, much better in this game than he was in the early sections. I'm going to say the same thing about Evie. Neither were really all that influential in this game. Steel did a good job making sure that Arthur's influence wasn't nearly as proactive and effective towards the bottom lane, basically just trying to neutralize the Wukong, which was great because he could rely on his AD carry in his mid lane to carry him in this game. But honestly, good game from Steel to have good map awareness and be able to be in the right place at the right time for a jungler. That is by far the most important trait that you can have in competitive, and I thought Steel did a good job, even if his impact wasn't like directly all that important. And then for Evie, again, not all that important up there in the top lane, but did actually win the Kennen into Aatrox matchup, something that he had a huge problem winning earlier in the day. Was really, really good to see him win this and kind of get back on the right track. Not the most dominant game again from Evie, but he doesn't have to be. He just has to not lose super hard. Give Yaharong, give Yutapon, give Steel the opportunity to win these games for you. Evie did that in this one. As for Chiefs, on the other hand, Definitely not the game you were looking for if you were Chiefs. You're now sitting at 0-2, and in both games, you've not looked all that good. You did play the early game relatively well in both of these games. I thought Arthur has kind of been a little bit hard stuck on this team throughout the Worlds game so far. He's actually had 2 really good early games for Chiefs both times, in my opinion, against 2 decent teams. Obviously, one really good team in Fnatic, and then Steel here I don't think is a bad early game jungler. Arthur has certainly held his own, and I definitely think he's been the bright spot. Raze and Aladoric, for their part, have also been pretty good at being able to manage leads. However, that bot lane has been so volatile in both of the games they played in. Upset and Rux obviously got a ton of pressure in Game 1, and for Game 2, they got a ton of pressure against them from Utapon and Harp as well, and so they really haven't been given the opportunity to just straight play out a 2v2, and I would actually be a little bit interested to see if Raze and Aladoric could actually pull that off, because from what I've seen from them, they are pretty competent in lane. They just really haven't been given a lot of opportunities to actually show off in that department. Really, when you're looking at weak points for this team, unfortunately, right now, it comes in the solo lanes, but most especially comes in the mid lane. I don't really want to dog on someone while they're down, but Tally is just not having a good tournament, and it's certainly been something that's been a little bit repetitive for this team. I talked about this in my preview for them, but Tally has been a little bit of a weakness for them this year. He's really not been someone who has run a lot of the games through them. He was someone who really wasn't all that good when he was in Academy in North America. Unfortunately, Tally just doesn't seem like he's a player of Worlds quality, and that's not a bad thing. Again, there are a lot of players out there who aren't of Worlds quality, but Tally just doesn't seem like he's going to be on the same level as a lot of the other players, especially in his role at this tournament. And so a lot of the rest of the members on this team are going to have to make up for it. They give him the Seraphine just to try to get him on a more supportive pick, but he misses absolutely everything on a crucial 4v4 like I talked about in the bottom lane that basically allows Utapon to get super fed and carry the game from that point onwards. I'm not saying, you know, it would have been easy to hit that because Utapon did a really good job dodging, but you still have to at least, like, hit something in that engage. You missed the ultimate, you missed the Q, you missed the double E. Like, none of it ended up working out for Tally, and he wasn't much better in lane either. Obviously, playing the Seraphine into Azir, you're going to get shoved in relatively frequently because you don't have the same kind of combat power. You're just kind of hoping that you can be useful in the team fights, and really, he wasn't at all, and you're just kind of hoping that Tally can hopefully be better. I don't mean to say this as any bit of flame because he's still 8,000 times better than I am, but I think unfortunately for Tally, he's probably the worst player at the World Championships. At least that's how he's looking over the course of the first 2 days. I'm really hoping that he can turn it around, but it has really not been a great look over the first 2 days for him. And then for Tapoon, I just want to see more. Obviously, you get that Aatrox, a pick that everybody's really psyched about, and you're really just not able to take over a lot of these late-game team fights. Of course, you're not in a great position to with a really fed Azir and a really fed Kai'Sa, and honestly, Hecarim has gold as well, but I still want to see more out of the Aatrox, and I want to see more about him in lane. I really think that Arthur, Raze, and Aladoric are incredibly good players, and if Tapoon can kind of complete that cycle, I could see them being a lot better against some teams that they haven't faced yet. Obviously, 2 really good opponents, not really good, 2 good opponents that they faced already, but you've got decent competition that you can maybe beat in Loud, and maybe even someone like a Beyond Gaming left in the group. Those are 2 winnable games, I think, for Chiefs if they can turn things around. I'm just going to need to see that a little bit sooner rather than later because the first 2 showings really have not inspired confidence that this team is going to make the best of 5 stages. But for DFM, boy howdy did they need this win. They were sitting at 0-2. If they go to 0-3, they can basically kiss their chances of making the best of 5 bye-bye because they have a couple of strong games left in them. But very, very good win for them. They're going to be very happy about that. Obviously, really good performances from their mid and bot lane. I think Steel's looking a lot better here in day 2 as well. Evie, I still need him to step up, and I really need to see him play the same way that he was playing throughout the playoffs and last year at Worlds, but I have a lot of faith that this DFM team can kind of pull it together, and right now, at least, I do believe they're probably on track to at least play 1 best of 5 here at Worlds. Moving on to our 5th game of the day, and it was a very, very interesting one for the standings of the specific group, as both of these teams are kind of sitting in a spot to potentially be playing in the best of 5s, but seeding is certainly important for both of them. We had the 1-1 Evil Geniuses team taking on the 1-0 Beyond Gaming team. 2 teams that, you know, definitely probably had expectations going into this of being near the top of the group, or at least in contention for those best of 5s to get out of groups. Obviously, maybe EG more so than Beyond, but Beyond, don't forget, is a pool 1 seed in this group, and so definitely something to keep in mind there. EG is able to take this game, though, a super important one for their quest, and honestly, in my opinion, this was probably their cleanest game of the day. There were a lot of things that went wrong for Beyond here, and a lot of things that went very right for Evil Geniuses, and that's really good to see, because at points, I was starting to get concerned. Obviously, not perfect, but definitely good enough. in my opinion. A lot of people are going to freak out about how this game was played. I'm going to talk about that a bit here, but let's go ahead and jump into what EG did really well in this game. Early game was definitely a big factor here. You get inspired on the Lee Sin, you try to be super proactive in the early game, but you have scaling options. The Aphelios Thresh in the bottom lane, a long, separated, reunited duo here in the bottom lane. Thresh kind of coming back in for this game. Certainly not a champion we've seen a ton of over the past few months, but Thresh just generally is probably always going to be fine if you can play him well, even if his numbers are pretty bad right now. Very similar, in my opinion, to a champion like Lee Sin in the jungle, where he is going to do the thing that he does really well, whether or not his numbers are good or bad. But you do accentuate that with a lot of champions whose numbers are very high right now. Champions like Sylas and champions like Aphelios, to be able to deal a lot of that damage towards the back half of the game. Great early game from Inspired, really sets JoJo up to be in a position to carry this game incredibly hard, and boy does he. JoJo absolutely demolishes the early game here and gets this team into a position where it very much feels inevitable, not if they're going to win. Unfortunately, from that point, they decided to turn into 2015 SKT and play ridiculously slow towards the mid game. That's great, certainly can't hate that at all, but overall, definitely wasn't the thing that I wanted to see, I would say, the most overall, but it's hard for me to be mad at them in this case because I do understand where they're coming from. You don't want to take a bad situation against a team that has a lot of tools to be able to turn around engages, like Rakan, like Aatrox, like Vi, even Akali, Xayah are able to disengage really well and ideally be able to turn around situations if you're not super confident in them. So they essentially just waited for objectives. They weren't able to get the first few because they were trading them for other things to generate that lead, but they ended up starting to stack dragons, get to this point where they were able to fight each other, and then we hit a break point somewhere around 20-25 minutes where they were like, I guess we kind of have to do something. More specifically, Beyond was like, I'm tired of sitting here doing nothing, and they started trying to engage in fights, and EG was just significantly ahead of them. By that point, JoJo was way too tanky to kill if he was able to get his full combo off. Impact was doing a lot with the Kennen on the ultimates, and Kaori at that point was absolutely obliterating people on the Aphelios. But none of them are my player of the game. My player of the game, if you watched it, should be no surprise, but it is going to go to Vulcan on the Thresh here, an absolutely crucial Thresh game. It makes me wonder why this champion isn't at least considered more. I know, again, he's not all that good right now numbers-wise, but the utility that Thresh offered in this game was absolutely unparalleled. Maybe it's just because Vulcan is so good at the champion, but obviously the play that everyone's going to point to is that literal, phenomenal, outstanding World Championship caliber play that he made in the bot lane when he was getting dove. Him and Kaori get 4-man dove around the bot side, towards the middle half, the back of the middle half of this game, I guess I would say. And Kaori dives really fast. They're able to reset tower aggro and reset up on Vulcan. Vulcan goes for the hook. He lands it, is able to kind of shift away in his movement there. Rakan goes for the W knockup. He flashes that. Has JoJo coming in the back, is able to lantern him in, able to flay them into tower range. Rakan has to flash out of tower range or he's going to die. And then JoJo's able to come in and clean up everybody on the scene. An absolutely goated play from Vulcan. I recommend you look it up if you haven't seen it. My retelling of it doesn't really do it justice, but a phenomenal play from him and just generally some fantastic moments. Those lanterns were absolutely crucial, especially for the Sylas in some of those late game team fights. Obviously, they were coordinating over comms who was going to be taking those because JoJo was taking them literally instantaneously, but the free escape that he allowed a lot of the members of the team to have was fantastic overall. It allowed JoJo to play super aggressive towards the back half of these fights, where he was really doing a lot and really was unable to die with that lantern. It allowed Kaori to play a lot more aggressive because if he ever did get caught, he had a ton of peel on his side to be able to separate and to be able to keep going. And obviously Impact Inspired, they were allowed to go pretty deep in for their ultimates and still be relatively comfortable getting out if they needed to. Obviously, you don't want to waste lantern, no offense, on Kennen and Lee Sin, but, you know, theoretically you could. So overall, the Thresh pick was absolutely ginormous, and I thought Vulcan played it really well. You got to give him a lot of credit. But obviously, JoJo was the damage carry. He had a really, really good day too, which I'll talk about here. Was genuinely phenomenal. One of the best players on this day. Pretty much no question. Definitely in the running for player of the day. Really good to see the 17-year-old turn things around. He's actually going to be 18 by the time you guys are watching this video the day after, which is really awesome. Happy birthday, JoJo. But obviously, Impact, Kaori, more side pieces in this game. Kaori was doing a ton of damage towards the back half, but he really wasn't all that needed in order to create and generate that lead. It was mostly JoJo and Inspired in the early game, and then Vulcan really helping JoJo maintain that in the last half of the game. If their carries play like this, like they played today, in both games over the course of the rest of this tournament, I really don't have a ton of worries that EG is going to be able to make it out of groups. Right now, to me, they look very, very solid, and I'm really not all that scared. We just don't want the version that showed up against Fnatic. As for Beyond Gaming, not the game 3 or 2 or whatever it was, game 2 you wanted to see from them. Here, obviously, a really good day 1. They looked really good. Minji especially looked really good in that day 1, but he could not keep up with JoJo. He just simply wasn't on the same level as JoJo. In lane, out of lane, you take the really aggressive Akali matchup into Sylas, you really need to generate gold and be able to fight back in situations like that. He just quite simply wasn't up for the task, if we're being honest. Nothing against him, but it just was the truth in that situation. Husha, Lakai, Waco, Kino, nobody on that team was really prepared, I think, to face EG, or at least their level of talent going into this, and I think it very much showed. Minji's going to get my dud of the game, but really no one on Beyond played all that well. Like I said, EG was able to generate early leads around the mid lane because Minji just got outplayed by JoJo at multiple points. JoJo was able to generate that lead. Inspired's ganks were absolutely crucial. They weren't really able to pull anything back while EG was playing really passive. Even the plays they tried to go for, like the one in the bot lane, usually ended up with EG getting a lead out of it. There really wasn't a lot of good moments in this game, I would say, for Beyond at all, and so was definitely a little bit disappointed with how they played, but hopefully they can turn it around. Again, a lot of the weaker teams still left to play in the group. I think Fnatic is still left to play for them as well, but outside of that, you know, still some good games, still some potential ways to get themselves in the best of 5s. If they can play a lot more like they did on day 1, they're going to definitely be able to get in there. If they play more like they did in this EG game, I'm not so sure. This was much more reminiscent, in my opinion, of what I expected Beyond Gaming to be coming into this tournament. But who knows? Maybe they are this because, in my opinion, they played the weakest team in the groups in game 1 in Loud. They were able to beat them, but it's not like Loud was setting the world on fire, and then they come in and get absolutely destroyed by a team that is better than them. So maybe they are number 5 in this group, but with the way Chiefs are playing right now, I think the bottom of this group is pretty up in the air. Maybe even Loud sneaks in. Who knows at this point? Overall, it's just kind of a fiesta. Beyond is certainly going to have to step up. Minji especially is going to have to step up. I said this in the preview for this team, but he is so integral in this team's success. If he just gets outplayed like he did in this game, I don't really see an opportunity for Beyond to be able to win consistently, but overall, not a good game from Beyond. Definitely need to see more. For EG, this is great. Just play like you did in day 2 for the rest of the tournament, and you're going to be fine. You're going to be able to make it to groups. I'm really not all that concerned by that. It's just the inconsistency with this team. Obviously, JoJo being so young, player like Kaori just stepping in, not having a lot of experience. You really hope that this team can be able to push its advantages more because the mid game was really slow, but overall, I'd much rather have a W on the board for Evil Geniuses than a super fun, proactive game, in my opinion. Moving on to the 6th game of the day here, we had another interesting one, this time between two teams that I think both realistically want to make a decent splash here in play-ins. One obviously has big aspirations, the other could potentially have them as well. We have a matchup here between 1-0 DRX and the 2-0 Saigon Buffalo, and I tried to hype this up as much as I could, but DRX wins this in 24 minutes. It's really not all that close. This was just a team diff. It is really going to be difficult to talk about this game for more than 5 or so minutes because not a lot happened in this game, if I'm being all that honest. Everybody on DRX one lane, they transitioned that into a late game where they have a Maokai Azir and a Tahm Kench protecting an Ezreal with an Aatrox to flank the backline, and they won the game. Like, there's only so much I can say because this wasn't the most action-packed game. Saigon didn't take a tower. There weren't really a lot of skirmishes. It was really just, oh wow, Zika really crushed Froggy in lane. Oh wow, Deft and Barrel were really negating a lot of the advantages that picking Xayah, like, created. The Aurelia simply did not win against this Aatrox at all. And then Graves certainly isn't going to scale in the same way against a Maokai that he would into a lot of other matchups. Like, what do you... After 10 minutes, everyone knew what the result was going to be because DRX was 2k gold ahead, and they're just simply better. Unfortunately for us, it very much felt like a 2015 game again, in the sense of Maokai, I love him to death, and I preach him on this channel, and I really do think he's fantastic, and he's 5-0 at Worlds, and definitely has me, you know, looking good for saying that he's going to be the best pick going into this tournament, but man, does he make a lame game a little bit lamer. And, yeah, you know, not to hate on all the Maokai players. I play Maokai from time to time. I certainly can't complain about him, but man, those saplings, they're basically the green... what is it, the trackers, whatever it was called, the green smite from back in the day that just let you have 75 wards. Like, that's essentially what you get with Maokai now, and it's, I'm not gonna lie, it's a little bit frustrating because you can turn plays that are typically in League or a game that's designed around making those plays like 60-40 plays for you. you can make those like 80-20 plays. And it's a little bit frustrating because it just allows DRX so much control over the map. You just can't allow a Korean team with so much macro sense to be able to have a pick like Maokai that can control the game so much towards the back half. It made them perfect. I should note, Juhan is in the jungle. Pioshik played day one. I talked about him on the channel. He played the Maokai really well. Juhan comes in. He plays the Maokai as well. He also looks really good. Certainly nothing to complain about, but, you know, I'm not going to say it was entirely Maokai's fault, but just generally speaking, it gives you so much in terms of value. The actual combat value that Maokai offers is great. His tank stats are awesome. His ultimate's really good, and the saplings do damage. But even outside of that, every sapling gives you vision. It's just absurd the amount of control that Maokai can have over the map, and DRX is certainly exploiting that now. But big credit to Zika. Don't want to go on too long about him, but I said it yesterday. People who went into this tournament not knowing that Zika was a top 5-ish mid laner in the world are certainly going to wake up in this tournament. He absolutely stomped on Xiaohu in lane yesterday, was phenomenal in the back half of those games as the Akali. Shows up here, Froggy, not nearly the same kind of quality, obviously, but Zika is making a really big case to be the single best player in play-ins, and it's really not all that close. He's going to be able to keep this up because he's been able to keep this up over the course of the entire season for DRX. Hell, people forgot how good he was last year in the LPL as well. Like, I think people just, I felt like I was having a brain rot watching DRX this entire season because all I could hear from the community was, Deft is so good, Deft is so good, Deft is so good. And I agree, Deft is very, very good as a player. But Zika's not good, he's great. He's legit one of the top 5 mid laners in the world, in my opinion, or at least close to it. Him, you know, Caps, like a lot of the people around that zone, they're all incredibly talented, even Showmaker in that conversation. I think Zika has a real, like Zika was better than both of them throughout the course of the regular season, and it really wasn't all that close. Obviously, you can say those guys usually turn it on for big international events, and I'll agree with you on that, but if Zika's going to play remotely like he did in the LCK, be expected for him to completely outperform all of whatever expectations were on him going into playoffs, or going into Worlds, I should say. Deft and Barrel were great. Ezreal's point and click for Deft, we've known it for years. You have the Aatrox, you got the Tahm Kench. Pretty standard comp here, and they were just able to execute on it and close the game. For Saigon Buffalo, definitely frustrating for them. This was just a team gap. Like, it's hard for me to say it's entirely their fault because there wasn't like any egregious mistake that they made. Like, certainly there were plays that they could have done better on. Hazmat, especially in that top lane on the Aurelia. That's not a pick that I think you can afford to pick in a DRX. You've got to go something that you can be more consistent on because Kingen just absolutely slaughtered him in the 1v1, and from that point onwards, the Aurelia was completely useless in this game, but outside of that, like, they really didn't make a ton of mistakes. Yeah, the Xayah could have been more aggressive in the early game, but it's Ezreal, Tahm Kench. Like, are you expecting to kill them? No. So I don't really know what you're going to do there. You have a Galio to be more proactive, to maybe help out the Graves and the Aurelia as your main carries in this game, but that was just never going to happen, and you get down, you're down like 2k gold at 10 minutes, and the game's basically just over from there. It's really hard to pinpoint a way that Saigon went wrong. I just think they are simply not as good as DRX. Like, they all lost lane, and then the game just ended. You know what I mean? We've all experienced games like that, and I think that's really just the best way I can sum this up. I really don't think I can make this go on any longer. Hazmat is going to be my dud of the game. Like I said, certainly needed to pick something a little bit more safe in the top lane against DRX, but I do understand the idea of wanting to play through top lane. DRX, if they are exploitable anywhere, ideally they're probably exploitable through top lane. Kingen was a lot better this year in my opinion, but certainly wasn't the kind of player that was going to be stepping up and dominating at the world stage, and so I understand if you think Hazmat has a better chance of being able to beat Kingen than any other lane has a chance of winning, but Shogun has been phenomenal at this tournament, not even giving him a chance to try and dominate lane. Not that there ever was one with Ezreal, Tahm Kench, but not even giving him like a late game hyper carry, giving him the Xayah, who's fine, but certainly not great. And again, all the people coming at me for all the, yes, I know there were 80 carry bans in this game, but there were still hyper carries on the board. Like, where is Twitch? Where is Draven? Like, these picks exist. I just don't understand why nobody's going to them, and so definitely would have preferred to see those over the Xayah in this case, but it's hard to really criticize anything else. Saigon Buffalo just honestly needed to be a better team to beat DRX, and unfortunately they are not that. But overall, not an awful loss for Saigon. They're going to have a chance to kind of control their own destiny here with the game against Mad tomorrow. It's going to be absolutely huge for them. If they win, they can get side selection most likely for that series against Mad. Obviously, I have no idea how DRX versus Mad is going to go for, I think, the final day of groups here, which is great timing, but outside of that, like, Saigon at this point is probably playing for 3rd or 4th, and ideally they'll probably be able to get it. They looked pretty dominant against the two teams they already beat, the two teams they're probably competing for that 4th spot with. But For DRX, I mean, they're pretty much cruising to the #1 spot in the group right now. As long as they keep this pace up, I pretty much have no doubt that they're going to hit that 5-0 mark and just pass on to the groups without playing a single best of 5. And Zika, at this rate, is pretty clearly going to be the player of the play-ins if he keeps playing like this. Jumping into our 7th game of the day here, and this was probably the one that most people were looking forward to. Very similar to day #1, RNG is involved in the game that a lot of people were drawing their eyes to most specifically, and in this one it certainly was interesting as we had the 2-0 Mad Lions taking on the 0-1 Royal Never Give Up team, and RNG does pick up their first win here, and it is very convincing. And this more so put context as to a lot of the other games that Mad Lions played for me, but for RNG, this was the kind of showing you needed to have after that loss to DRX. I went on a pretty big rant towards the end of yesterday's episode, obviously not anything that was like super heavy, but more so, it's crazy to me that they're considering, that there are people out there, a good amount of analysts that I respect, that are considering RNG a top 3 or 4 team, and I get it. Like, from a principles perspective, I get it. Breathe, Wei, Xiaohu, Gala, Ming, as a 5-man unit, on paper, should be a top 2, top 3 team in the world, but anybody who has watched this team for an extended amount of time over the course of the last 2 months will know that that is just simply not the state that this team has been in for that amount of time. It was really good to see them step up in the ways that I was most concerned about in this game. This very much felt like a relief for me that they're going to be a lot better than hopefully I'm giving them credit for. They have to be better than they were in playoffs, and they have to be better than they were in the regional finals. If they're not, then they're going to be a group exit. And I mean that even with the fact that their group is weak. But it'll be interesting to see. Obviously, I'm not predicting that into the future, but RNG looked a lot better in this game overall. They absolutely dominated the flow of this game from the early portion, and a lot of that was due to the jungle dominance that was shown by Wei. Really huge game from him on the Graves, obviously an incredibly aggressive pick. A really aggressive comp, I would say, in general. You have the Jax to try and pull away that Aatrox from the team fighting duties, but you have the Galio to be able to support the side lane if you need him to, and you have the Aphelios as well for if you do need to get into those 4v4, 3v3 skirmishes towards the back half of the game. Really, no one's going to be out-damaging Aphelios in this meta. I think the Kai'Sa hype is a little bit overblown. I still think Aphelios is just essentially a better version of Kai'Sa, but shout out to Wei for enabling all of this. Wei did such a good job in the early game being able to corral a lot of the pressure that Mad Lions was essentially attempting to create, because shout out, that's what they were doing. They were trying to make plays, and RNG was just like, no, we're Jax, Graves, Galio, Aphelios. We're just going to scale into the late game. Wade did a great job of corralling that. And then towards the mid game, when things started to ramp up for this RNG team, it was a lot of pressure in the top lane for Breathe. He gets super far ahead on this Jax. A really good game from Breathe. Very nearly got my player of the game, but Wei, honestly, with a ton of damage coming out in the mid to late game, those ultimates were absolutely crushing people coming out of the jungle. Really, really enjoyed what I saw there. Always had the backup from Ming engaging, from Xiaohu's peel, and the ultimate just in general. Breathe also did a really good job of that. Overall, Wei was just super safe this game to be one of the biggest damage dealers in the game and really controlled the map. So for me, he's going to get my player of the game. He was the best player in RNG here. A lot of other people are going to bring up Breathe, and a lot of other people are going to bring up Gala, and I understand both of those points a considerable amount. I'll talk about Breathe first in the top lane. This Jax was impossible to deal with, and honestly, a big reason why they were so consistently able to win a lot of the team fights in the late game, which is crazy to say because Jax isn't typically a team fight champion. This is somebody who typically you're drafting, especially against the Aatrox, in order to pull him out of team fights, in order to generate a ridiculous amount of push in a side wave, be able to create that distraction that brings an Aatrox, or brings a Talia, or brings a Trundle into that top lane, creating a 4v4 scenario where ideally you have Graves and Aphelios just out-damaging whoever is in the other side, and they're really not able to do all that much about it. That's not what happened in this game. Breathe was participating in a lot of the 5v5s that were happening on this map, and he was really, really crucial. It is really good to be able to get AoE stuns against this team, because there are a lot of instances in which Aatrox, or Kai'Sa, or Nautilus, or even Trundle are all going to be grouped into similar area in order for peel, and if Jax can get on that, there's really no way for the Kai'Sa to actually be able to either survive in the fight or be close enough to do any sort of relevant damage, and so the Jax pick ended up being absolutely major, and Breathe did a ton of good in this game. Gala also played it phenomenally, just completely outplayed Unforgiven. It really wasn't close at all, and that's something that's really good to see. In the video yesterday, I talked about, for RNG, the biggest things that I was worried about. I really didn't have a lot of problems with Xiaohu and Ming. I really felt confident about them as long as the meta was continuing to go their way. Xiaohu's a great carry-oriented player that can be supportive and can do both at the same time. Ming is probably the best support in the world if engagers are meta, but it was Wei and Gala that had really been hyper inconsistent for me in the playoffs, in the regional finals, in the important games that led up to this World Championship. Those two, in my opinion, were the reason that this team was going to Worlds as the number 4 seed and not as a seed that was higher. They needed to show up today. Wei had a great game, and I thought Gala also had a great game. That's why I'm feeling a lot better about their performance today. Gala gets the Aphelios, gets to play against his classic Kai'Sa, and absolutely obliterates Unforgiven on it. This matchup was nowhere close, and that really shouldn't be the case. Kai'Sa definitely has tools to be able to deal with Aphelios in the mid game, but Gala just simply played better. Ming definitely outplayed Kai'Sa in this game, and it just led to a lot of advantages and a huge bot gap for RNG, and you gotta be super excited about that. And then Xiaohu was on Galio, a pick that, honestly, kind of increased in volume as we went on with the day, and I don't really agree with that. I don't think Galio is all that good right now, but I understand the idea of it. The shove and roam mentality is pretty easily countered by Galio, who can just ult in to different things. I just don't think his actual impact on fights is nearly as high as some of these other damage or even just more supportive oriented picks. I prefer picks like Orianna with teleport. Obviously, Talia, Ahri, Sylas, those are the big 3 right now, and I would prefer them as well. Even something like a Victor, I think, offers a little bit more, but overall, if Xiaohu loves Galio and wants to play him, then go ahead and play him. It's certainly not going to make me mad. Overall, really, really great game from RNG. Happy with what I saw from them. For Mad Lions, very disappointing. You wanted to see them at least be able to hold their own against RNG, and it really felt like they were never in a position to do so. Jungle down to support got completely gapped. Elyoya couldn't beat Wei. Niski couldn't beat Xiaohu. Unforgiven and Kaiser could not beat Gala and Ming. It really was just a team diff overall. All of them lost in considerable ways at different points of the game. Elyoya, Unforgiven, Kaiser all lost early. Niski definitely had some good plays on the Talia late with those Talia walls separating, but they certainly did have the damage to pick back up, and he made some really bad positioning mistakes at points in this game. Really, the only one, ironically, that I'm not mad at is Armut, who I thought was actually keeping them in the game in a lot of these team fights. RNG was very scared of the Aatrox, as they should have been, because he could have really caused a lot of problems for them, but with that ultimate off, like if he popped it too early, there really was no shot for him to be able to affect the team fights, and even then, Breathe really outplayed him towards the back half of this game, so it's hard for me to say that he was all that good. Overall, Kaiser's gonna get my dud of the game. He just died simply way too much. You could give this to Unforgiven, and I wouldn't be all that mad with you either. Both definitely deserved it. Not good games from them. Definitely need to see better performances out of those two, because as we all know, it's a little bit of a bot-focused meta right now. Jungle as well, but we'll get to Elyoya. It's certainly still a bot-focused meta. You still are just likely going to win if you have the better bot lane, and Unforgiven and Kaiser aren't going to be that against some of the best teams in the group. This team still has to play against DRX, and that is a lane that really is going to have to step up if they want any shot in that game. Elyoya's in a similar boat. He has to be the early game aggressive jungler that he was in the LEC. If he's able to control the map, if he is able to generate those leads, if Niski's going to be able to be proactive and you're going to be able to create numbers advantages across the map, Mad Lions is going to be in their comfort zone and they're going to be a lot better. But what we've noticed is that teams with prep are just able to take away a lot of those options, especially if they're better like RNG here. So definitely worries about Mad Lions overall, but overall, you have to hope that they're able to get it together before they end up facing DRX, because that's going to be the game that really, really matters for them. But even the Saigon Buffalo game tomorrow is probably going to be huge for their chances here. If they can't win that, then they're maybe looking at a 4 seed going into best of 5. However, maybe the best they're looking at right now is third place if they can't beat DRX. So certainly some things to tune up, but they're probably going to have an opportunity to do so in the best of 5s. For RNG, again, felt really good about this game. This alleviated a lot of the fears that I had. It showed that they were at least possible to do this. Obviously, I would have liked to see this against DRX. It would have made me feel a lot better, but Draft was so horrid in that game. Ideally, you can chalk that up to Draft and just hope that they're different in group stage and once you get out of that, but definitely still a wait-and-see approach for me on RNG for being a top 3 or 4 team in the world, but they're very clearly a top 7-ish team in the world, pretty much exactly where I had them in my power rankings, and that was really good to see here in this game. That's going to bring us to our 8th and final game of day 2 here. A very, very fun day to watch. And we closed it out with a fun game as well. An undefeated team taking on a winless team. And unfortunately, it went the way that everybody kind of expected it to. We had the 0-2 Istanbul Wildcats taking on the 2-0 DRX. And DRX really just absolutely dominated them. This was another game that just felt like DRX playing a team that wasn't as good as them. Who saw this DRX showing up? I mean, I'm the biggest DRX fan in the world. Go follow my Twitter if you want to see more DRX Homer tweets. But, I mean, I couldn't have even predicted this team to go show up at the world stage because holy crap, was it awesome to watch this team play this game. They were just having a ton of fun. Very similar draft here, going back to the Maokai in the jungle, but going back to the Akali, and man, you just can't give Zika the Akali. You just can't do it. He is simply too good. Deft was awesome on the Misfortune. Kingen and Beryl did a little bit of trolling at points in this game, but it's fine. It's absolutely fine. It didn't matter. They were so far ahead, they were able to get away with it. I don't want to be a broken record on this channel. I really don't want to harp on topics over and over and over again. And just 2 games ago, I was sitting here talking about how good Zika is and that he's been the best player at play-ins. And yeah, it continued here. He got a Kali, he got his best champion, and he played like an absolute madman. He was obliterating Saren in lane on that Azir. He had one of the most disrespectful plays I have ever seen in my entire life, where he gets 1v3 collapsed on in a side lane only for him to escape, recall, and then as all of the rest of them are recalling to try and stop the base push that's happening from the rest of the team, he teleports right next to them because he knows they're not going to stop. It's one of the most unbelievable things I've seen, one of the most Giga Chad moments an Akali player has ever had, maybe, and you love to see it. He is absolutely stepping up and playing some of the best League that he's played in a while. I'm saying that, but like, this is how he's played all year. He's been this good all year in the LCK. It's not like the LCK doesn't have mid lane talent, and he's been absolutely cracked on all of them. A lot of people are saying, oh, it's just the Assassins. He can only play Akali, he can only play Sylas. Oh yeah, I'm sorry, he can only play Akali, Sylas, Ahri, Azir, Orianna, Victor. Yeah, I mean, his champion pool's really small for this meta. What are you talking about? I just don't understand. He's so good on everything. I watched him on the LCK this year to know that his Azir was phenomenal. He can play the Assassins really well, but he's really good on these more passive picks in the same vein. You just don't want to put him on those because he carries so hard on these aggressive picks, and I, for one, love it. I love to see a player that I've been hyping up and really excited about really showing up on an international stage, making everybody take notice, and I hope he just keeps this up throughout the rest of the tournament because he is super cracked right now, and he's easily player of the game here again. Really, another good game from Juhan, him, Pioshik. It doesn't really matter. As long as this team gets Maokai, they look like they're going to be in a good spot. I am a little bit concerned for what happens if this team doesn't get Maokai, but honestly, really not all that concerned. I imagine they're going to be able to adapt. The Maokai is important, but it's not like an unplayable if you don't have it. They're just better than all the teams they're playing against. I think they'd be just better even with another pick, even if the Maokai helps a ton, which I think it does. And then Deft was really good here. Again, another solid performance from Deft. This is kind of what you've been getting from him all year long. He was very, very solid in this game. Not something groundbreaking or revolutionary, but fine. Certainly overstepped and mispositioned at points, but that's to be expected. It happens for AD carries at Worlds. Look at Holy Phoenix in this game. Certainly had moments where he was wildly out of position. Deft definitely capitalized, but a good game overall. Definitely fun, but Zika was the guy here, and he's the guy for DRX. He's been the guy all year long. People were getting really upset when I was saying that in my LCK weekly reviews and in my LCK primer, my playoff primer, that I thought Zika was, in my opinion, by far the best player on this team in the regular season. Well, I mean, all things come full circle. It really does feel like Zika has been amazing for this team, and it feels like he's finally getting his due. I'm happy for him. Kingen and Beryl, definitely not perfect, but they didn't have to be in this game. Ideally, you're going to see them play a little bit more controlled, especially Beryl. You want to see him actually hitting bandage tosses on the Amumu. Ideally, if you're going to pick it, he's been picking it all year long. It's never really looked all that good for DRX. Maybe pivot to something else. I know the Misfortune Amumu is really strong right now, but it doesn't seem like Beryl has a great grasp on that champion. We know he's very good on the other engagers, the Nautilus, the Leona. We know he can play those. So I would expect, or I would probably anticipate, more of a switch to those as the tournament goes on. It just doesn't feel like he's got a great Amumu. And for Kingen, it was fine. He was weak side the entire game. He was clearly having a lot of fun and definitely got himself into positions that he shouldn't have been in. I don't imagine that's going to happen against better teams. Great game from DRX. Not a great game from the Wildcats. They really have not shown up at this Worlds tournament like I wanted them to. I was actually a little bit excited for them. I thought Starscream was a great weak side top laner. Ferret and Holy Phoenix were two really good carries in the TCL. But man, their weak links have certainly become weak links. Holy Phoenix tries, but again, he's super aggressive. And against a team like DRX that is just going to punish a lot of your mispositioning mistakes. A player like Holy Phoenix is going to potentially get caught out a lot more than he normally would. What are Ferret and Starscream going to do here? You're on Trundle and Ornn. You're not going to be carrying the game. It's up to Saren and Farfetch to be able to create plays. Saren was just outplayed by Zika. Oops, it happens. He's the best player in group stage. And then Farfetch was just awful, and he's been bad the entire tournament so far. I hate saying that, but man, like, you really got to see him improve. I talked about Tally being a huge hindrance to the Chiefs team in Group A. It feels like Farfetch has kind of been that for Istanbul in Group B, where if he doesn't improve, I really don't see this team getting to the best of fives or even having a shot. Obviously, they were never projected to. They have 4 incredibly good teams in this group, and at 0-3, I think they're basically out at this point. I don't know if they're officially out, but they're all but officially out at this point, and I think a big reason of that was unfortunately just the support play of Farfetch'd just in general. Not that Holy Phoenix or Saren or Starscreen or Ferret really played amazing so far at Worlds, but you certainly wanted to see more out of that support position. He's going to get my dud of the game here, just like he got dud of the day yesterday in day number 1. So certainly not an ideal tournament for Istanbul, but you've got some games in the back half. I'm not sure if you're officially eliminated, but if you're still in it, go out and play your hearts out. Even if you're eliminated, go and play your hearts out. This is the TCL rep at Worlds. You still got a lot to prove, and you have players that I know can potentially step up and do it. They just haven't been doing it recently. I would love to see it. For DRX, just keep the ball rolling. You look phenomenal right now. You look like the best team in play-ins, and I don't even think it's all that close, and when RNG is there, that looks phenomenal. I mean, you absolutely crushed them yesterday. You won a very close game, but you won it decisively by being better, and both of your games today went less than 27 minutes. It's an incredible look for DRX, and I just hope that they can keep it up. At this pace, they're going to be battling for like a quarterfinal, semifinal spot at Worlds if they look like this the whole tournament. All right, well, that is going to do it for my Day 2 Worlds play-ins overview and analysis of all 8 games that we got here today. What a fun one. What a ride this has been. It's certainly a lot of fun to be watching League all day and then to talk to you guys about it. It's very, very late as I record this. These videos do take a long time to make, so I really would appreciate if you guys did enjoy it, leaving a like, letting me know in the comment section what you felt about today's games. Who did you feel overperformed, underperformed? What team so far has surprised you in a good way, maybe surprised you in a bad way? I love hearing you guys' thoughts down there. And also, what are you expecting to happen? Obviously, the best of 5s are starting to shape up. What do you think is going to be happening when we get to those moments to get out of play-ins? It's all going to be a very interesting conversation, but of course, let me know down in the comment section below, and while you're down there, like I said, leave a like, but also hit the subscribe button. I'm putting out daily Worlds content. If you enjoyed this video, I promise you're going to enjoy the rest of the content that I put out, and I highly recommend you hit the subscribe button, hit that bell so you can be notified when I give my analysis for every single game that's going to be going on at the World Championships this year. It's time to talk about my player of the day and my dud of the day. Player of the day is absolutely no surprise. I mean, come on. It's Zika. Come on. It's Zika from DRX. I didn't have to think about this twice. The easiest decision I've made of all time. If you want to know why, just go watch the reviews. It's not even close. Dud of the day was a little bit more difficult to do, but for me, I am going to give it to Tally on Chiefs. He just simply needs to be better. Chiefs is a team that I was really excited about moving to this tournament. OS historically has performed really well at recent international events. I'm thinking MSI 2021. Even MSI this year, they weren't all that bad. But, and Chiefs absolutely dominating that region gave me hope that they were going to be able to translate it. But Tally has been a little bit of an anchor for that team so far through their first 2 games. He certainly can turn it around, and this team generally can turn it around. But it's definitely going to need to be him that starts it right about now, because he has certainly not been good for this team. And it's time for him to step up. And so definitely looking forward to seeing that. But with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day. And I will see you all later.